Coming up next on NMZ Live TV.
God told the children of Israel, "Be ye holy as I am holy." It sounds impossible, but if God said it, that means there's a possibility that we can live holy lives.
Up next on NMZ Live TV.
For a few moments today, we speak on the topic, a call to consecration. A call to consecration. And our text is taken from Joshua chapter 3, verses 5 to 8. Joshua chapter 3, verses 5 to 8. And we're going to invite us to stand for the reading of God's holy word. And Joshua said unto the people, "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders amongst you." And Joshua spake unto the priests, saying, "Take the ark of the covenant, and pass over before the people." And they took up the ark of the covenant, and went before the people. And the Lord said unto Joshua, "This day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. And thou shalt command the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you are come to the brink of the water of Jordan, you shall stand still in Jordan." You may be seated. A call to consecration. More than 100 years ago, a British revivalist issued a holy dare that would change a life, a generation, a city, a nation, a world. That timeless echo that challenges across, that timeless challenge that echoes across every generation is this: the world is yet to see what God will do with and for and through and in and by the man who is fully and wholly consecrated to him. Dwight Lyman Moody, upon hearing this challenge, made this statement: "I will try my utmost to be that man." You see, my brothers, our text taken from verse 5 of the verses read. According to the New International Version of the Bible, it reads, consecrate. Where the King James says sanctify, it says consecrate yourselves. For tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things, where the King James says wonders among you. Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. You see, at this point, the children of Israel were on the verge, for the second time, of entering the promised land. the land that God had promised them through their forefather Abraham, reaffirmed to Isaac, reaffirmed to Jacob. A land that they even knew when they spied out the land 40 years ago truly flows with milk and honey. However, this was a land that their parents did not see because of the sin of unbelief that took place at Kadesh Barnea. You remember, they were at Kadesh Barnea just about ready to go in. Moses sent 12 spies out. 10 came back. Yes, it flows with milk and honey. And because of that sin, because they did not believe that God could carry them into the land and God could conquer the giants in the land, God says, you're going to wander for 40 years. And he says, not one of you of this generation shall see the promised land. And here it is now, 40 years later. 40 years of wilderness wandering. Victory was finally at hand. And the only thing between them and the promised land was the Jordan River. But before they could cross the Jordan River, before they could enter into the promised land and conquer this land that their forefathers only dreamed of, the Lord, through Joshua, established a pattern that they had to follow, and I believe we too, 21st century believers, must follow if we are going to see, as the Lord promised Joshua in Joshua 1, good success. You notice the children of Israel were told to sanctify, to consecrate, to purify themselves. You see, before they could enter into the promised land, they had to deal with some stuff that they didn't deal with for those past 40 years. Because you remember, if you remember from reading in Joshua, they had to go and circumcise all of the males. They didn't perform that over the wilderness journey. And I like how Mark Batterson, in his book All In, puts it. He says, anytime God is about to do something amazing in our lives, he calls us to consecrate ourselves anew to him. You notice when God is going to do something, there's some things we got to deal with. Remember, the NIV says, consecrate yourselves. Or the King James, sanctify yourselves. My brothers and sisters, as believers, in order to fully comprehend or understand what consecration is, we first have to come to grips with what it is not. You see, consecration is not just going to church once a week. Even though we know we are commanded not to forsake the assemblies of the brethren, of ourselves, and the assembly of ourselves. Consecration is not just having a daily devotion. Even though we know that in order to grow spiritually, we have to spend time with God. Consecration is not just fasting, even though we know that it is a part. And through fasting, we learn to deal with the sin that so easily beset us. But that's not just consecration, not just fasting. Consecration is not keeping the 10 Commandments. Consecration is not sharing our faith, only sharing our faith with others, and we know that we are commanded to share our faith. It is not only or solely just giving the tithe and the offering, and I have done my duty. But even though God commands us that we are to bring all of the tithe into the storehouse. Consecration is not just volunteering in ministry. And we know here at New Mount Zion, we can use additional volunteers in each of our ministries. You see, consecration is not just leading a small group. It is not just raising your hands in worship. Consecration is not just going on the mission trip. Even though all of those may be an outward sign of consecration. You see, we have to come to grips with the fact that consecration is more than behavior modification. It is more than conforming to a moral code or doing good deeds. Consecration is more than following a set of rules. You see, so often we as believers, we search the scriptures, seeking promises to pray over our lives, expecting God to answer no matter how we are living, or even if we are obeying the scriptures. You see, we sometimes, and one prayer we love, when that book came out, the prayer of Jabez, we loved it. And we started quoting, "Oh, that thou may bless me indeed and enlarge my territory." But we forget some things about Jabez. We wanted to pray, God, be with me, keep me from harm, so I will be free from pain. But when you study Jabez, you find out something. Even though he prayed that prayer unto God, in 1 Chronicles 4, we have to realize, because it said something, it says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. More honorable. And you see, my brothers and sisters, BibleHub.com, it defines honorable as worthy of honor, fit to be esteemed or regarded, established, illustrious. And said he was more than all his brethren. But we don't like the part also, because we got to skip over these verses that here it says, Jabez, even though he was more honorable than his brothers, it said he received his name Jabez because his mother bore him in pain. In the midst of the struggle, as he was growing up, Jabez made a decision that he was going to follow God. Think about it. In the midst of it. And you see, my brothers and sisters, when we head back to our text, just as the Lord said to the children of Israel, I believe he is saying to us at New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church today, he says, I am about to do a great and mighty exploits among you. I am about to do wonders amongst you in the New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church. He says, I am about to give you authority. I am about to expand your territory. I am about to enlarge your vision and purpose. He says, but first, as individuals and corporately, we must consecrate ourselves to God. You see, we must understand that when we were first saved, we were saved from our past sins, which is called theologically justification. And as we progress towards the final stage of salvation, which is called glorification, that's when we arrive into heaven, it says, but we have to go through the process of sanctification or consecration. And Cindy Jacobs puts it this way, says sanctification or consecration is the process in which you become more Christ-like. This is the process of consecration to God. It is a personal choice of setting oneself apart for God's holy use. A personal choice of following and submission to God. End quote. You notice some things of Israel when they went into Jericho and they captured Jericho. It came right down. The wall decided that, man, I can't let this be wonder for 40 years. 40 years I was in this wilderness, man, like these shoes out fashion. Look at the latest shoes. Look at the latest clothes. And you can just use your spiritual imagination. Oh, my Lord, look at all the jewelry. And he took it, hid it, and they went to a little town called Ai. And because of sin. And you notice that tells us when we are consecrating ourselves to God, I cannot decide I'm consecrating myself today. And today's consecration lasts me for a lifetime. You see, Pastor Rick Warren, he reminds us, he says that change requires making choices. It is not enough to dream of changing. It is not enough to desire change. In order for you to change, you will need to make a decision. You must choose to change. It has to be intentional. And what consecration is, it means that we have to let go of some old habits. We have to let go of some old hurts. We have to let go of our old pattern of living. We have to let go of our old sins. And if you notice when Pastor Charisse in her sermons dealing with putting off, and her sermons and looking there at removing those things that so easily beset us, she's going individually through various sins that we have to lay aside. And you see, consecration means that I have to spend some time with God. I have to look, and as the Holy Spirit shines His life on my life, I need to come to the point where I have to say, Lord, this got to go. I submit this to you. Too often, we love our pet sins. And I don't know about you, but this year, as we were going through the various months and with the fasts, there's some areas that were popping up in my life that I would try to, no, let's push that aside. I don't know if you're like me, but when you're fasting, you find yourselves get very irritable. And you're trying to figure where that's coming from. And that's something within that we have not submitted to the cross. You see, I have to make the choice when I know if we're fasting and I know that the smallest of things will get me annoyed. I have to come to the place where I say, Lord, I know Satan is going to throw these darts at me. I now need you, Holy Spirit, to help me. I need your word. I need the helmet of salvation. I need the sword of the Spirit. I need my feet shod with the gospel of peace. I need to have my shield. Because too many of us, we, instead of dealing with our sin, we treat it like an animal. You know, when you pet it and you just, that's a nice ear. Okay, now go back in your cage. No, we can't come out. You got to stay in there. You see, when we are talking about consecrating ourselves, it is a personal decision to will and to act in order to fulfill God's purpose. There are some of us here who have not consecrated or sanctified our jobs to the Lord. And we wonder why we're going through some struggles. Some of us have not consecrated our homes and our marriages and our children to the Lord. But let me warn you, as you go through this process of consecrating, of submitting to the Holy Spirit, the devil don't give up very easily. And that's why we need to spend time with God. You know, as I said, consecration was not only Bible study, but it's part of it. I have to spend time in God's presence. I have to spend time in prayer. I have to spend time in fellowship with believers. Consecration means that I have to be obedient to God. It means that if God says, be not unequally yoked together with unbelievers, I got to come to grips with that. If it means that God says to put me first, and you know, there's some of us who love to justify, oh, well, tithing is Old Testament. Yes, it's in Malachi, but you notice we don't see Jesus talk about it. But if you notice what Jesus said about tithing, he says, the scribes and the Pharisees, they tithe the mint and the cumin. They count how much? About 10% for God. He says, but your tithing got to be beyond that. You got to be beyond that. You see, it means that we have to go, he is saying, go beyond. God is calling us. If we're going to see great exploits, we have to come to the place where we throw off our sinful nature, our former ways of life, as the Apostle Paul says, which is corrupted by lust and deception. See, we got to put some things away. Consecration is the process of becoming more like Christ. And according to GodQuestions.org, it says, in the Bible, the word consecration means the separation of oneself from things that are unclean. Especially anything that would contaminate one's relationship with a perfect God. You know, we like to find out where the line is, and we're going to say, okay, the line is there. I'm not going to cross the line, but let me see how close I could get to the line. And we can slither and slither until we do, and then we don't know when we hit the line, when we fall over. God is calling us New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church today. He says, we have to set ourselves apart for God's use. We, as Hebrews 7 describes it, we have to be made perfect. You see, we have to come to that place. As Peter said, quoting, going all the way back from Leviticus, when he reminds us, he says, "Be ye holy." And he's quoting God when God told the children of Israel, "Be ye holy as I am holy." It sounds impossible, but if God said it, that means there's a possibility that we can live holy lives. You see, my brothers and sisters, we need to come to the place where we see that consecration has to do with separating ourselves from that which is unclean unto that which is holy. And notice this is something we have to do. Thank God we have the power of the Holy Spirit to do it with. We don't have to worry about trying on our own, because we have the power of the Holy Spirit, that as we see these areas that we need to separate ourselves from, Holy Spirit, I need your help today. This ain't going, Lord. I could feel it coming on. I could sense it. I need your help. And I'm going to tell you, the Holy Spirit will step in situations you don't know how that turned around. You could see it coming. And sometimes Satan, brazen enough, he's coming straight at you. And the Holy Spirit knows just how to, when you go to him, sidestep him. See, if you trust him, but too many of us want to trust our own selves. You know, when we look in Proverbs, it says, "Lean not in your own understanding. In all our ways, we have to acknowledge God, and he will direct our path." You see, too often we want to go and follow our own way. But consecration means that I have to choose that I am going to follow after God. It means I'm going to choose to walk away from the sin that so easily beset me. It means that I'm making a conscious effort. I have to do my part. And you remember what I spoke the other time when he says in James, "Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Resist the devil, he will flee." But you need to know how to recognize him. Too many of us play with the devil. And notice I'm saying us. Because yesterday, as I was going over this, and as I was spending time reviewing and praying, there were some areas that the Lord was dealing with me with. Because there were some areas I just wanted to kind of, no, Lord, let's not deal with that now. And he said, no, we got to deal with that now. Too many of us play with God. We want the outward appearance of sanctification. Notice when David sinned, and God dealt with him because of his sin. And David went before the Lord. David had to do some things that were outward, that reflected what took place inward. You see, when the Old Testament, and especially when they consecrated themselves, it means that they had to bathe themselves. And water was not a commodity for desert wanderers that you use as freely as we do it. If you notice when you read in Leviticus, when he was given instructions to the priest, before the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, he had to take off his old garments. He had to bathe himself in water. He had to put on his clean linen garments and all of the paraphernalia that God had commanded before he went in, which was a sign, an outward sign of inward cleansing. And you see, when we as 21st century believers come to this place where we're going to consecrate ourselves, that means there's inward, but there's some outward evidences. What did the apostle say? Him who steal, let him steal no more. And he went through the whole list. And I don't want to go through the whole list because I believe, some of you are feeling somewhere Pastor Cherise can be dealing with that somewhere along the line. But God is saying we must come to the place where we make a conscious decision to give ourselves wholly unto him. I love how the Apostle Paul puts it. He says, put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. Notice what he said to the church at Ephesus after he told them to put off some things. The church at Colossae. And he told them there's some things that they had to put off. And this is the church he's talking to now. He says, here are the earthly things I need you to put off. Sexual immorality. This is the church he's talking to. Impurity, passion, evil desires, and covetousness. And he says covetousness, and he just in case we didn't know, he says, which is idolatry. That means when I covet in something, I worship in something. And in verse 8 of Colossians 3, he goes on, he says, anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. The church. Then he goes on and he says, we ought to put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of the Creator. And he says we ought to put on humility, meekness, patience, bearing one another, and forgiving one another to the extent that God has forgiven us. He says, above all of these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Notice, if we are to consecrate ourselves as we go before God, when we deal with these sins, some things we have to shake off. But he says we have to submit to the Spirit, and there's some things that we have to take on. You see, he's telling us, he told the children of Israel, you have to separate yourself from the world. He's telling us in New Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, we are to separate ourselves from the world. And I want us to notice, I keep saying us, because I'm part of what we are speaking about. Today, my brothers and sisters, we have to come to grips that, as the Apostle Paul told the church at Rome, we are not to conform any longer to the pattern of this world. And he gives us the process. We are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. That means daily. We have to spend time with God. So often now we relegate that hymn, "Search Me, O God," just to communion. But daily we have to ask God to search us. You see, consecration is the act, and it involves our lives being a living sacrifice to God. I daily have to sacrifice my sin nature. I daily have to step into God's presence and ask him, and I'm using these figuratively, I have to ask him to renew my mind. And the only way I do it with his word. I have to spend time reading, meditating on his word. But you notice it's important. I have to obey his word. We cannot be like when Jesus used the illustration of the house, building the house. And he says, the person who does not obey him, does not do what he says, is like one who builds his house on the sand, and as the waves come, the waves washes it away. He says, but we have to build our lives on the rock, the solid rock of God. As the waves come, we can stand firm. Remember, consecration is a deliberate effort on our part to become more like Christ. And we only do that by spending time with him. I don't know what it is that you are struggling with today. But I knew there were some areas God is speaking, not even was, is still speaking to me about, that I have to deal with. And as we spend some time reflecting, I'm going to invite the praise team to come. There's a song the praise team sang a few weeks ago that's still resonating in my spirit. A song by T.D. Jakes. I was made to worship you. And notice the words on the screen. He says, am I worthy to raise my hand and give you worship? You see, if I'm not consecrated to him, I could do this, but this means nothing. Have I lived a life that's pleasing in your sight? If I'm living a life to please me, all of this is a show. Have I opened my heart so that you may enter? Then if not, oh Lord, I apologize. I'm going to ask the praise team to lead us as we reflect. I want you to look at the words. That's why I asked them to put it on the board, on the screens. Because we need to look, if we're going to consecrate ourselves, we need to come to that place where we humble ourselves before the mighty hand of God. And when we humble ourselves, as James promises us, that God will lift us up. Too many of us want to be lifted up, but on our terms. Praise team. Let's reflect. Am I worthy?
Am I worthy to raise my hands to give